Thank you so much, Mr. Williams.
You should look away.
Director and writer Shravan Tuwani brings us Holy Ghost. And this is a low-budget, supernatural police procedural thriller. It's not really a horror movie. It is a low-budget film. And what's the story? Well, it focuses on a few different people from this kind of small American town. It primarily features a young girl that has been kidnapped by a somewhat prolific child offender, and she is seemingly rescued by a cop, but no one really knows who this cop is, and there's kind of an investigation to find out who it actually is, and you know, why is there no trace of him, things like this. And there may well be a kind of supernatural element. And then kind of the focus shifts to other people. Another girl gets kidnapped from a different kidnapper. And we learn about this kind of the situation involving this policeman. And it involves a kind of supernatural component. Let me just kind of say that. So that's where we'll go with the plot synopsis. Now, I'm going to say from this point, there may well be some spoilers in this review. I'll try and keep it as spoiler-free as possible, but to really give any context, I will have to give some spoilers. Okay, so let's get on with it. Now, this is a low-budget film, so there are restrictions in regards to kind of scope and production value. Let's talk about the positives, and let me start with what I think is the best thing about this movie. The plot I found to be very interesting, but it takes a while to get going. Let me say that. I think when you watch this movie, and then this is my experience with this, when I kind of watched it, I was thinking, and initially, and I would say for the first half of this movie, it's kind of like a low budget pot boiler, and it's just kind of like so. And the plot, I understood what was going on, you know, fair enough. And yeah, I can argue that by that point you understand the supernatural element to it. But it's not until later on in the movie that I think it really actually gets pretty interesting, when you kind of find the reasons why they're supernatural and the motivations of the supernatural's entities, what it's trying to accomplish. That's, to me, which is probably in the last act of this movie, to be honest with you, that is when I think you start to think, this actually is now a fairly interesting plot, and it kind of informs the previous, you know, what you've seen up to this point previously. But it takes a while to get there, and I wonder if people will stay around for that long, because it doesn't feel like it's massively interesting until that point. But when it's all said and done, I have to say, I actually thought this story was pretty interesting, and I actually wanted to know more of it. I was like, oh damn, I kind of want to see what happens next. And there's going to be some negatives in this movie, don't get me wrong, but despite those negatives that I will come on to, I was still intrigued as to where this story would go beyond the point that it finished. So, you know, that is the biggest compliment that I can pay to this movie. It's a film, I think, that does have a pretty interesting plot, and it asks some questions of you. A lot about kind of what would you do, what choice would you make? Almost like a moral quandary in a way. Yeah, and it kind of thinks, oh, yeah, do you know, I would kind of be interested in seeing like a continuation, a little bit longer of the story, or even a sequel, something like that. I have seen quite a few negative kind of like comments about this movie, and I think a lot of it is down to the low production value. But the actual elements of the story, if you can kind of watch the whole thing, I think are worthwhile. So I'll say that. I'd also say, I think when you watch the film as a whole, I think it is fairly unique in regards to some of its story elements. I mean, it's kind of like a movie that makes you think it's like, okay, I'm going to try and be as vague as I can. So this movie is trying to have like, or at least this is how I initially approached it. It seemed like it was trying to be a metaphor for God. So this cop, is he kind of like a stand-in almost for putting your faith in God? Do you put your faith in this police officer, and it's like a metaphor for putting your faith in God? But then it doesn't really appear that is the case, and there may well be a kind of darker element to it. And you know, initially I was thinking, okay, it's kind of an allegory for faith and everything, and that's fine. And then it kind of throws this other element into it. Think, oh, actually, now it's become, you know, you're not quite sure, because there's a sort of a darker element that's kind of introduced. And you're thinking, oh, is this? You know, so there you go. I mean, again, there's going to be spoilers here. It almost feels like what it is offering you is like someone who is offering to replace God as a kind of a new sort of thing to worship. And this ultimately is what sort of is going on. It's kind of like this cop is actually a kind of a ghost who kind of helps people, but he kind of requires you to then serve him. And so it's almost like building up a recruitment for his followers and almost becoming like a rival to God and that. So that to me was super interesting. So, you know, I kind of quite enjoyed the plot. What else can I say that worked? It's got a large cast. This is clearly a low budget movie. It has a large cast, and as such the performances are mixed, I will say, and I can imagine people would probably focus on some of the weaker performances, but I do think there are some that are kind of very stronger. The one that would point out to me is like the female police officer, who is probably our main character. The kind of focus shifts as the film goes on, but you know, the most amount of screen time is probably given to her as our kind of lead investigator, trying to figure out what's going to happen. I thought she was actually relatively strong, to be honest with you. There's a kind of a couple of others. So the acting is mixed, but there are some performances where I do feel, it's kind of, it's fine. You know, the performances are kind of fine. On a technical level, I mean, that they've clearly had some trouble with kind of when they're filming it, picking up some of the kind of the voices. So they've used ADR to redub some of the kind of the audio. So the audio is very clear. You'll never have a problem with, you know, not being able to understand anyone. So that's the upswing of it. The downside of that is that it kind of feels a little bit like artificial at times. You know, so it's a little bit of a double-edged sword. They clearly had a low budget and not had great audio recording to begin with. So I understand why they've done ADR. It just doesn't sound like it's completely kind of natural. So, you know, how do you feel about ADR is the question I would ask yourself in this. But, you know, it's, other than that, I think the way that it's filmed and stuff, I mean, it's nothing outstanding, but it's perfectly fine in regards to its kind of technical abilities. So what doesn't work? I mean, as I've been kind of hinting at, this movie is low budget, and you know, it does show through. There is some limitations. It's clearly that the audio wasn't strong to begin with, and this is why they've had to use ADR to go back, and it does kind of feel sort of artificial at times and has that sort of, you know, recorded in the studio feel to it. The direction, while competent, isn't outstanding. You know, there's nothing really kind of going to blow you away to any kind of directorial kind of flourishes here. It's just very much like point the camera and shoot, ultimately. And as I've kind of mentioned, I think the performances are mixed, and there are some weak performances. I had a quick look at some reviews, and a lot of people critique the acting here. I don't think it's across the board. That it is really a mixed gambit of performances here, but there are some people who certainly have not as good a performance as others, shall we say. I think maybe the only thing I think I would say is this movie is really like effects free. It's not a kind of a movie where it's a scary film, even though it does deal with kind of supernatural elements, and the supernatural elements are never like special effects or anything like that. So it has no sort of scarier moments or moments of wow or kind of anything like that. There's no set pieces or anything particularly sort of like fantastical happening on screen. So you might find it a little kind of flat in regards to that. Again, it's probably down to a budgetary issue, but I kind of understand the context of this ghost cop who is mistaken for a real person. And as such, you don't want him to kind of look like a ghost necessarily. And as interesting as this plot is, I think it takes a very long time to get to what I think makes it a really interesting movie. And although I think before that the plot is fine, it's kind of so-so, we know that it's a ghost cop, but it kind of feels like, alright, it feels like a little bit like a faith-based movie, and it's okay. So it takes a little bit while for it, I think, really to become that interesting. And then the last thing I would say is I feel the movie doesn't really end. It kind of feels like there's more to the story that needed to be told, and I wanted to see more. But it almost, if this is it, then it's a little bit frustrating. I'm going to give it a 5 out of 10. A higher mark than I was expecting to give this, I'll be honest, when I was watching it. But I was so intrigued by the plot when the movie concluded. I've got to say, this despite some of its technical kind of limitations and shortcomings, the actual story itself I found genuinely quite intriguing. So a 5 out of 10. Have you seen it? Would you see it? Please do let me know, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time.